It's truly a great pleasure to be here. And thank you, everybody, for coming to this talk. So I tremendously appreciate that. So Bob Schiller and I have written a book. The book is entitled Fishing for Fools. I don't know if you probably can't see the cover from here, but the cover is done by a great cartoonist, Ed Koren, and it shows a snake and it shows an apple with a dollar sign through a hook that's being dangled in front of some very, very shaggy people who all have rather different greedy expressions on their face. Actually, you don't really need to read the book if you buy it because it's all in the cover. And of course, that cover is, in fact, the very first story in the Bible. So that's another place where you can read all about it. So what is the motivation for this book? The first and the most fundamental motivation of this book is to challenge the view of the public and of economists that whatever markets do is right. The further problem is that such belief that whatever markets do is right transposes itself into our moral system. So this is been enshrined in a morality that greed is healthy, to use the famous words of Ivan Boesky. Of course, all of us would take into account income distribution and such things as pollution for why markets do not necessarily work perfectly, but that does not exhaust the reasons why competitive markets yield bad outcomes. Can people in the back, can you hear? Good, okay, you can hear. The role of this book is therefore to undermine the fundamental basis of free-to-choose thinking by showing that there's not only a good side to free markets, but there's also a very serious downside. The book explores that markets are the playing field for deception and manipulation, because they spawn what we call fishing for fools. Now, all economists know this. Every economist knows this, but that leads to the second very general motivation. The rule of what can and what cannot be published in economics leaves holes. There's some perfectly valid and important things to say, but there's no way to say them that would be acceptable in any journal. For example, quite a few economists thought that financial derivatives would lead to the current crisis. But economists could not figure out a way to express those views in the form of a paper. So I believe that fishing for fools is one of those holes in economics. Because we all know it cannot be published. But then because it cannot be published in journal form, it gets ignored. And because it was ignored, we had the financial crisis, which is the central event in the economic history of our times. But then the book also has a subtext. It is a subtext which gradually becomes increasingly important as it proceeds. That subtext concerns a principle in a way in which we think, and that results in our being fished for fools. I'll only come to that at the very end of my talk, but I think it's very important, and I want you to note that maybe when we come to the end of the talk, and if there's time for questions, we can talk about that. Okay, so with these prefatory notes, let me begin with the theory. The book is based on conversations with the psychologist Danny Kahneman some 25 years ago. In a conversation then, Danny told me that the basis for psychology was that we humans are machines, and we are machines that are prone to error. What's the job of the psychologist? The job of the psychologist is to ferret out that error. In contrast, he said, the basic fundamental notion of economics is equilibrium. So what does that equilibrium mean? It means that if there's a profit left on the table, someone will take up that opportunity for profit. Now, you see that every time you go to the supermarket. So think about going to the supermarket. People get into lines, and people sequentially choose what they think is the shortest line. And in equilibrium, the lines are almost the same length. And that's the concept of equilibrium. Now, I've seen this all my life, which is probably longer than yours so far. And I always, and ever since I've been an economist, of course, I always knew that there was an equilibrium there. But you know, every time I go to the supermarket, this may be stupid, but every time I go to the supermarket, you know, I have to search around for which is the shortest line, you know, which is the shortest line. Is it behind the woman who has the baby or behind somebody else who has shaggy beard or something like that? But what I don't, but I always, it doesn't occur to me intellectually that of course I have to search out for the shortest line because all those lines are almost equal in length. Okay, so that's one of the things I've learned in writing this book. And maybe next time you go to the supermarket, if you don't think about that every time, you'll see this is there. Okay, so now let's go into proceed. How to put Danny's insight into economics. So his insight says that free markets will not just provide what we really want. That's only the case if we human machines are making the right choices. But free markets will also provide us wrong choices. They will do so as long as there's a profit to be made. Well, let me restate. The principle means that if we have some weakness or other in the equilibrium, that weakness will be taken up if there is a profit to be made. So what does that mean? That means that among business persons looking around and deciding where to spend their investment dollars, some will look to see if there are unusual profits from our weaknesses. And if they see such an opportunity for profit, that will be what they choose. As a result, here's the conclusion, as the result, economies will have a fishing equilibrium. What is that? That's an equilibrium in which every chance for profit, more than the ordinary, will be taken up, and that will include our willingness to make the wrong choices. Okay, so let me give you some examples. So here's example one. It's Cinnabon. Okay, so most of us, let's see. So there we are, Cinnabon. Most of us probably take it for granted that there just happens to be such an outlet right there where we're waiting for our delayed flight or at the mall. All those outlets and all that cinnamon, which undermines our diets, are a natural result of a free market equilibrium. But it's no coincidence, for example, that in Washington, where I'm coming from at the moment, there's an outlet at both Dulles and National Airport. Okay, so that's the first example. I'll give you example two. So, example two is capuchin monkeys. The second example comes from a metaphor that was invented by Bob. Now, Bob is a true genius. I wish I have a mind which could have thought of this, but I don't. And Bob thought of this, and I'll tell you about it. So Keith Chen, Venkat Lakshminarayanan, and Laurie Santos taught capuchin monkeys how to use money to trade. And the monkeys developed an appreciation of price, and they saved, and they did other transactions. But let's go beyond those experiments, and this is what Bob did. Let's do a thought experiment. We would give a large population of capuchins substantial incomes and let them be customers of for-profit businesses run by humans without regulatory safeguard. Well, you can easily imagine that the free market system, with its taste for profits, would supply whatever the monkeys choose to buy. So we would expect an economic equilibrium with concoctions appealing to strange capuchin tastes. But amid this monkey cornucopia, their choices would be very different from what makes them happy. How do we know? Well, we know from Chen, Lakshminarayanan, and Santos that they love sweet fruit roll-up tacos with marshmallow fluff. So capuchins have limited ability to resist temptations, and we have every expectation, and this is a line from Bob, we have every expectation that they would become anxious, malnourished, exhausted, addicted, quarrelsome, and sickened. Okay, so now we come to the point of this thought experiment, which we'll see what it has to say about humans. So our view of the monkeys has analyzed their behavior is that they have two types of what economists call tastes. Okay? The first type of tastes are what the capuchins would exercise if they made the decisions that are good for them. The second type of taste, their fruit roll-up taco tastes, are those that they actually exercise. Now, humans are no doubt smarter than monkeys, but we can view our behavior in the same term. We can imagine us humans, like the capuchins, is also having two different types of taste. The first type of taste describes what's really good for us, but as in the case of the Capuchins, that's not always the basis for all of our decisions. The second concept of taste is the tastes that determine how we really make our choices, and those choices may not, in fact, be good for us. So the distinction between the two types of tastes in the example of the Capuchins gives us an image. So here's the image. We can think of our economy as if we all have monkeys on our shoulders when we go shopping or when we make economic decisions. Those monkeys on our shoulders are in the form of the weaknesses that have been exploited by marketers for ages. Because of those weaknesses, many of our choices differ from what we really want, or alternatively stated, they differ from what's good for us. So then we are not generally aware of that monkey on our shoulder. So in the absence of some curbs on markets, we reach an economic equilibrium where the monkeys on the shoulders are substantially calling the shots. Okay, so that now takes us to a further proposition. The modern rendition of Adam Smith's invisible hand statement is the following. It's that a competitive free market equilibrium is Pareto optimal. What does that mean? That means that once such an economy is in equilibrium, it's impossible to improve the economic welfare of everyone. For example, a change that would cause Barclay's welfare to go up, Barclay's over there, would cause my welfare or someone else's, perhaps one of yours, to go down. Any interference, according to this proposition, will make someone worse off. That's what Adam Smith said. The theory, of course, recognizes some factors that might blemish such an equilibrium of competitive free markets. We all know about pollution and bad distributions of income. But with those qualifications, the result is believed by economists to be true. But then, with completely free markets, there's not only freedom to choose, there's also freedom to fish. So, what does that mean? It will still be true that the equilibrium will be Pareto optimal, but it will be an equilibrium that's optimal not in terms of what we really want. It will be an equilibrium that's optimal instead in terms of our monkey on the shoulder taste. And that, for the monkeys, as for ourselves, will lead to manifold problems. Well, standard economics has ignored this obvious difference because most economists have thought that, for the most part, people do know what they want. Now, I must confess, for maybe 45 or 50 years as an economist until I began writing the book, I sort of thought that that was basically true. But then when I started writing the book, we dug up example after example after example where this really made a difference. So that means that there's nothing much to be gained from examining the differences between what we really want and what those monkeys on our shoulders are instead telling us. But think about it. Think about it just for a very short period of time. And that ignores the field of psychology. And what's psychology about? That is, for the most part, about the effects of those monkeys. That's, for the most part, what they teach in the psychology course, why, in fact, we're doing things which are really not what's good for us, but we're doing things with monkey on the shoulder taste. Furthermore, to give you just a little bit of a note that's more closer to standard economics, it ignores the fact that the competitive equilibrium will also involve people generating information that will lead us astray insofar as that's legal and insofar as the profit to be made by it. So, in summary, it ignores that markets enable fishing for fools. Okay, so I've given you a lot of theory. The onus now is on Bob and myself in the book to indicate in real life that this equilibrium does affect our lives. So, the onus is on us. So we have 4 areas of nobody could possibly want in which we're seriously fishing for fools. So let me give you what the 4 areas are. So area 1 of no one could possibly want is personal financial insecurity. So a fundamental fact of economic life has never made it into the economics textbooks. Most adults, even in rich countries, go to bed at night go to bed at night worried about how to pay the bills. Economists think that it's easy for people to spend according to a budget. We shall see later that it isn't. No one wants to go to bed at night worried about the bills, yet most people do. Here's area 2, financial of nobody could possibly want, financial and macroeconomic instability. Fishing for fools in financial markets is the leading cause of the financial crisis that leads to the deepest recession. Every time it is different, as they say, the stories are different, the entrepreneurs are different, and their offerings are different, but also every time it is the same. There are the fishermen, and there are the fools. And when the built-up stock of undiscovered fishes, which is named the bezel by John Kenneth Galbraith, gets discovered, then asset prices crash. In the last crash, the investment managers who had purchased the overrated securities could not have possibly wanted them, but they had them. So area 3 of nobody could possibly want is ill health. Here we discuss how the pharmaceuticals do their fishing and how the food industry, again with a pH, fills us up with sugar, salt, and fat. To give you one example of the pharmaceuticals, in its 5-year career, Vioxx is estimated to cause 26,000 to 56,000 cardiovascular deaths in the United States. No one wants bad medicine. As another point, about 69% of American adults are overweight, and more than half of those people who are overweight, 35% of the total of all Americans, are furthermore obese. Yet no one wants to be obese. And then there is tobacco. Nobody wants the problems that develop from smoking tobacco. Area 4 of nobody could possibly want is bad government. Just as free markets work at least tolerably well under ideal conditions, so does democracy. We see it all the time, whereby politicians silently gather money from the interests and then use that money to show that they're just one of the folks back home. So our later chapter shows a campaign by Charles Grassley of Iowa, in which Grassley was acting just like every other congressperson and just the way you have to act if you're going to get reelected. So Grassley had gathered a multi-million-dollar war chest, and he showered the state with TV ads. And what he did is, this is one of the most beautiful ads. I'm sorry I don't have a clip to show it to you. Because what he did was, he had this ad, and he came home to Iowa. And Iowa has the most beautiful grass and the most beautiful green lawns. And he was there on his tractor lawnmower, and he was on the tractor lawnmower carving out these beautiful ellipses of freshly cut grass as he was going around. And here's the ad. He said, Grassley, that's his name. And he said, I like my job in Washington, and I do work hard at it, but what I really like to do is come home and mow my lawn in Iowa, just like one of the folks. So, and then actually in the background, to fill you in on what's in this ad, so it's those most beautiful green grass, Iowa's beautiful grass, just like here, I was coming. And then in the background, there's an incredibly beautiful red barn, which exactly matches in tone the color. The red of the barn is the same tone as the green of the grass. And you got to vote for somebody who does that. The ad is a piece of beauty. But irrespective of whom you're going to vote for, almost no one wants a democracy where elections need to be bought in this way. Okay, so this gives us a summary of what the book's about. I'm now going to give you a taste of what goes into the chapters. Okay, so probably most people here recognize this person, Suze Orman. Okay, so probably most of you know Suze Orman, who is a popular TV figure. And she gives, as you can see from this, very loud and shrill financial advice. Now, her audience seems to adore her and lap up her every word. Well, when I asked an IMF economist friend of mine about her, Gil had the predictable reaction. He had watched her for only 10 seconds. He could not stand her mommy knows best voice. And, furthermore, he found her investment advice simplistic. But that does not explain why Orman's audiences lap her up. So her most popular book is The 9 Steps to Financial Freedom, Practical and Spiritual Steps So You Can Stop Worrying. So note that, there's worrying in the title. So let's contrast what she tells us there with the portrait given of consumer spending in the economics textbooks. Okay? According to economics textbooks, we decide on our demand for the proverbial apples and oranges by having a budget for our spending, and then we choose the combination of apples and oranges that we can buy that will maximize our happiness. Well, Suze Orman's financial advice books tell us that consumers do not follow such a textbook protocol. They do not follow such a textbook protocol when they make their purchases. Well, how could consumers do anything other than what the textbooks describe? Well, I'm an economist. I think I actually do that. But maybe, in fact, I don't. But I think I do. So Orman tells us that people have emotional hang-ups with regard to money and also with regard to spending it. And people are not honest with themselves. And as a consequence, they do not engage in rational budgeting. Well, how could she know? Well, she is a financial advisor, and she has a test, and this is her test. She asks her advisees to add up their expenditures, and those expenditures all but invariably fall short of what a documented accounting from the records later turns up. So figuratively, relative to the proverbial trip to the supermarket to buy apples and oranges, it's as if her advisees spent too much in the fruit section. By the time they reach dairy products, there's nothing left over for eggs and milk. In real life, such budgetary failure translates into having nothing left over for savings. This failure to deal cognitively and emotionally with money, says Orman, leads to those unpaid bills. So it's her mission to keep those bills down so that her readers and her clients will no longer worry at night. So that's the role of mommy, and also why those audiences are excusing that mommy knows best voice. So it's worth noting, as I already have, more than parenthetically, that worries, as noted in Orman's subtitle, are central concerns in the financial advice books, but do not see them in books on economics. And then, of course, we can paint a statistical portrait. Statistical portrait, which shows that this is a serious concern. Okay, so this poses a problem. The Suze Orman view of the world suggests that people are spending too much, and they are worried as a result. So there's another perspective. What's the reason for it? In the United States, the goal of almost every business person is to get you to spend your money. So life in a capitalist economy is a continual temptation. So just think about it. Just walk down a city street. The shop windows are there literally to make you come in and buy. So in the United States, in the old days, there used to be things on such streets. There used to be pet stores. And those pet stores, when Barkley and I were younger, used to place puppies in the window. And there was even a popular song about it. I don't know how many of you know this. So Patti Page, the singer, was coming down the street, and she sees such a puppy, and she sings the following. I hope you don't mind if I'm going to sing. Okay, if you do mind, you can cover your ears. So, how much is that doggy in the window? The one with the waggly tail. How much is that doggy in the window? Arf, arf! I do hope that doggy's for sale. Okay. So just think of, oh, thank you very much. Okay, so some of us in the audience will know that song, but very few people remember the next verses which follow. But the amazing thing about these next verses as follows is they're exactly about what the book that we have written is all about. And, As I said, again, you don't need to read the book. All you need to do is to go to this song, and you can see that in an uncanny way, it reproduces what this is all about. So the next verse says the following. I won't sing it. I think I probably won't. Okay. I must take a trip to California and leave my poor sweetheart alone. If he has a dog, he won't be lonesome, and the doggy will have a good home. Now think about this, okay? Think about the ambiguous meaning of that verse. Could be, this is a wonderful relationship that this girlfriend and this boyfriend are having. This may be the most wonderful girl in the world, the most wonderful young person. And she's going to give the boyfriend the doggy. And she's going off to California. Every time the doggy wags its tail, the boyfriend is going to put on a smile and think about the girlfriend and how much he misses her. So that's one possible meaning. This is a wonderful young woman, and it's a wonderful relationship. You know, there's another possible meaning. The other possible meaning is, no, they have a disastrous relationship. She's leaving him and scattering off to California, and she's leaving him with this darn doggy, and he has to take care of the doggy, and every time the dog needs to be cared for, the poor boy has to take care of her, the dog, and walk her and do all that, and it's the biggest nuisance that he possibly can in life, and not just remember this wonderful relationship, it's a remembrance of a failed relationship. Well, that's the whole idea of the capitalists, of fishing for fools. There's this ambiguity. One side, this capitalism is giving us this wonderful cornucopia. On the other hand, at the same time that it'll give us this cornucopia, it will also give us things that we don't want. And those things that we don't want are also present there. And they're just as much as present and as endemically part of the system as getting the things we want. So, just to continue, in the shopping mall, one does not literally walk down the street looking in the windows, but temptations there asking you to buy. It's on either side of the aisle. In the supermarket, the temptations are also there. So these invitations, these attempt allures are pervasive. So the idea of tempting the consumer to buy, to spend her money, is at the heart of free market capitalism. So this gives you one taste of what the book is all about. I think I now have time to give you the taste of another chapter, and I'm just going to give you a very short synopsis of it. Okay, so the financial crisis. There are hundreds of books on the financial crisis. One of the great things about the financial crisis is that it's been the golden age of financial journalism. So the typical one is 500 pages long, and it tells the story of my institution. So, for example, Lehman or Goldman Sachs or Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the Fed or Treasury or Bank of America, Citicorp, etc. So implicit in each of these books is that my institution is central to the crisis. The aim of this chapter, the chapter in the book, is to do the exact opposite. It's to tell the story of the crisis in 15 pages in general terms. So you scratch any economist and we will go into economics speak, so we're trained to think in terms of things like supply and demand. So that means that we often ask very good questions and have good analyses of problems. So fishing for fools is an offshoot from how we standard economists typically do our analysis. But it's not so standard that every economist was asking the right questions in the build-up to the crisis. But we should have been. Why should we have been? Because fishing for fools gives an extremely succinct explanation of what happened, and I'm going to give you one rendition of that. Okay, so here's my rendition of that. Okay. So if I have a reputation for selling perfect, beautiful avocados, I have an opportunity. I can sell you a rotten avocado at the price you would pay for the perfect ripe one. I will have mined my reputation, but I will have also fished you for a fool. Okay? So here's some nice avocados. I hope they're good on the inside. Okay. So such a story lies at the heart of the continuing financial crisis that dominates the economics of our times. The reputation mining in question involved the subversion of the system for rating fixed income securities. So the reputations of the great ratings agencies of Moody's and Standard & Poor's, for example, had been built up over the course of almost a century. Their job was to rate bonds on their probability for default. Now, in the early 1990s and early 2000s, the ratings agencies took on themselves the task not just of rating bonds, but also for rating more complex derivative securities. The complexity of the payment structures made them somewhat hard to rate, but something else made their rating all but impossible. The underlying assets, such as mortgages, were all but inaccessible to the raters. But the public out there, the public would believe whatever ratings were given to them by the agencies. So an industry grew up to do a reputation mine. So let's make an analogy. So by analogy, rotten avocados were being labeled perfect. With that label, they commanded premium prices. So a whole Central Valley full of growers went into the profitable business of producing such avocados. The mining of the ratings is the basic story of the financial crisis. But of course, it's not all of the explanation, so let me give you a little bit more. Okay? We must also explain why the production and sale of those overrated securities brought down the financial system. The answer, again, is simple. The value of those securities reflected their ratings. That enabled commercial banks and investment banks and also hedge funds to borrow huge amounts of money short time, invest in the overrated securities, and pocket small profits from the interest spread on every dollar of investment. So they took on a lot of leverage. That borrowing is made with the rotten securities as collateral. For the moment, that collateral seemed as good as gold. It seemed as good old gold because the ratings indicated that there was almost no chance of default. But then, as you all know, the truth was discovered. Those avocados, perfect as they were on the outside, were really rotten on the inside. They were worth much less than the bankers and the finance managers had paid for them. So this is what we saw from Frankfurt to New York to Reykjavik. Financial institutions owed much more than they owned, and without bailout, they were bankrupt. So the chapter then gives the historical answers to 4 questions. How had the ratings agencies initially established their reputation? What then changed, making it more profitable to mine that reputation than to keep it? Why were the buyers of those rotten securities so naive? And why was the financial system so vulnerable to the discovery that the assets were rotten? Okay, so let me now tell you about the uncovered chapters of the book. There's a chapter on the role of advertising, on what happens when you buy a car or a house or your credit cards, the lobbying, as we mentioned, food and drugs, inventions, there's tobacco and alcohol. There are 2 chapters which talk about the financial system and the type of thing that makes the financial system inherently unstable. Those are chapters 10 and 11. Then we talk about what keeps the system in general. We also, there are counter businesses and the public reacts against this fishing for fools, and that, in fact, protects us greatly from this. There's a chapter on that, and then there's a conclusion, and we talk about where this fits into economics. Okay, so now let me conclude. So I've described the beginning of the book, but most importantly, what emerges is a new concept. Okay, gives a picture. Gives perhaps the major reason regarding where and how and why we are fish for fools. So that introduces a new variable into economics, a new variable which is the stories. It's those stories that people are telling themselves when they make their decisions. So this is a new variable that changes both how we think about economics and how we think about economic policy. We saw that new variable, which is stories, in rudimentary form in the Suze Orman example because Barbara and Tim, when they go to the supermarket, are telling themselves a different story than what's imposed on them by standard economics. And that is why people are going to bed worried at night. But that storytelling is not just about why we worry about the bills. It's also about bad national policy and our morals more generally. So in the concluding chapter, we tell how a wrong-minded U.S. national story, which says that everything will be pretty much all right if the government steps out of the way and we just let people be free to choose, has resulted in systematic bad policy. So the book then is telling a story about the economy which contradicts the fundamental logic of economics. It's also saying that the current national myth about what's good and what is bad is wrong. Puts in modern guise one of the most important lessons of the Bible. We should be our brothers and our sisters' keeper, and that, of course, should be at the heart of American values. So this is just, okay, so that's my talk. Okay, thank you.